Hi, everybody. Welcome to the very first podcast that we're calling Serve Like Jesus. My name is Ben Foley, and I am the president of an international mission organization called ServeNow. And you're going to hear a lot more about that and what God's doing around the world. In fact, to that very point, the reason we're doing this podcast is for two reasons. One, we wanted to give opportunity for you to get to know us a little bit more on a personal level, but also hear in I think a unique way how God is at work around the world in some amazing ways that not only we get to be a part of, but we would like to continue to invite you to play a key role in as well, because there really are wonderful opportunities all over the world. But again, we'll get to a lot more of that ahead. But for this first podcast, the focus is going to be on giving a little context and background of ServeNow, some of the principles that we work under in what it looks like to serve like Jesus. So we're gonna talk a lot about that. But I want you to know this isn't about us. This is again about what God's doing and the story that He's inviting us into, the story that He's writing in this world in very real time. But let me first of all introduce my co-hosts or co-workers. I don't know exactly what we call you in the context of this. All I know is that there's three of us, and the number three is significant, but I don't want to really compare us to the Trinity. First of all, that would be heretical, right? And also, I don't even know who would be the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. So before I go too much farther,
we're a Trinity.
yeah. Before I go too much farther down that rabbit hole and get off to a really bad start, I'll backpedal out of that one. But I do want to introduce you to these two that will primarily be a part of these podcasts, the three of us together. At times, we'll have special guests on and we'll introduce you to some very special people. But primarily, it'll be the three of us interacting together and sharing different aspects of different things and topics as we go through these podcasts together. So I'm going to start with Emily Lasco and let her introduce herself and her role with ServeNow, and then we'll go to Mr. Kendall Keeler after Emily.
Yeah,
I'm Emily Lasco. I'm super excited for this opportunity and to be on this podcast with two incredible people. And so I am the marketing assistant at ServeNow. I work in a variety of different areas, and I just try to support with different marketing needs, some other people on the team, and just trying to make sure we have a presence online and we're moving forward and progressing with the technology.
Awesome. Thanks, Emily.
And my name is Kendall Keeler, and I am the East Coast representative, which means that I get to represent some wonderful people around the world, Christians who live within the countries that we work in. I get to represent them here in the United States, get to share stories and invite people into being a part of what God is doing around the world. So it's an honor to represent the folks that we work with worldwide. And I used to work with Ben's brother several years ago, and now I continue to move around the family tree here, and I get to work with Ben. We've had some fun experiences together over the last 5 years.
And since Kendall went down that path with talking about working with my brother before, the note that I like to add to that is, of course, that now you're working with the wiser, the better looking brother.
Yes, I'm sure they can see that.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So yeah, the privilege is all yours, of course. But
I feel
also,
grateful and honored.
yeah, yeah. But also another interesting connection point now that you mentioned that with Emily is that Emily's dad, Dave, was actually a board member of ServeNow years ago.
Long time ago.
Yeah, it seems like a long time ago now.
Yeah.
And actually, this will be fun to say too. You know, I've been with ServeNow a little over a decade, even though ServeNow is only about 12 years old at the time of this recording. But Kendall, Emily, how long have you guys been with ServeNow?
So I've been with ServeNow. It's definitely less than a year, but I don't know how to count my months back. I feel like 7 months. That seems about right.
Yeah, I think that's about
If
right.
my math is correct.
Yep.
I've
Yeah,
been with ServeNow for 7 months, but I've been well familiar over the years, attending banquets, volunteering. My family growing up hosted some guests from out of town. So I've just known of ServeNow since a long time, and it's really cool just to be a part of it now.
in fact,
Yeah.
when your family hosted a home meeting, I was just thinking about this too. Our current chairman of the board, that was
Hmm.
the first Serve Now meeting he had been at, and part of why he
Wow,
eventually, became on the board and now is chairman of the board. It was actually at your house
that's
at that time.
crazy. That's so cool. I love that. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And uh, so I was first introduced to ServeNow through a church meeting. Ben and the founder of ServeNow had come, shared at our church. Also, at that event was one of our partners in Ukraine. So I first became a supporter of ServeNow, and then about 5 years ago, came on staff. So it's been a joy to work even closer with the organization.
Awesome. Well, just in order to help those that are listening get to know us a little bit more, I thought it would be fun to also ask this question for this episode. If you can think of one fun travel fact about yourself or story while you've been on a trip, doesn't have to be necessarily a mission trip or a Serve Now trip or vision trip, but even vacation or anything, just travel related, what comes to mind that you would like to share with people? And I'll start first. I was literally just thinking about this today and going back through. You can see the map of the world behind me. I had to turn around and look at this to try to map it out. But I was thinking about how many different countries I've been in through the years. Not again, not just with Serve Now, but just any travel. And I counted at least 35 countries, but about 20, more than 20 of those, I've been to those countries multiple times, and some of them many times. So I thought that was pretty cool to think about. Out of the currently 195 countries, I've been to 35 of them, but many of those multiple times. So that would be a little fun fact, I think, about myself, travel related.
And one of the things I learned about you, Ben, is that you actually have two passports so that you can switch them out. I had never known anyone that had two passports.
That might be a topic for another time. Maybe a secret episode if we want to dive deeper into why that is the case. That I, yes, do have two passports.
I didn't know that.
Hmm. Yeah, it's at least a little moment of feeling identifying, with Jason Bourne and feeling half cool. Because if I could do anything else, we should do this sometime. But I mean, if I could do anything else, and this is so far removed of, I can't tell a lie. I can't or I can't get away with telling a lie, I should say. And I can't tell when other people are lying. I mean, we play some of these games at home that have that element incorporated in, and I get so stressed out every time because I either get caught right away or I am totally off who is, you know, lying in that context. So I would never make a good spy, but if I could do anything, that would kind of be like my alter, uh, you
Alter
know,
ego.
yeah, exactly. Some type of agent, but I'm not as cool as
How about you, Emily?
So the first one that came to my mind, I'm not always good at thinking off the top of my head. So when I went to Kenya for a month on a trip, I turned 18, and during that trip, I was given a nickname. I don't know how or why, but my nickname was Duma, which is cheetah in Swahili. So I have no idea why I was given that nickname, but it's just kind of, I don't know, sits in the back of my head, and not many people know that about me.
now the whole
Except my
world knows.
mom. She was there with me.
Well,
Awesome.
hopefully, when you're playing a game, you're not cheating.
Oh, Kendall,
That's
Kendall's
funny.
setting a reputation already. He's going to be the one with terrible dad jokes.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
Well,
okay. We
and
like it.
it's gonna get worse because a fun fact about me is that Ben taught me that there is actually a book on airplane etiquette.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it came up just because I was doing a simple thing of eating a hard-boiled egg on an airplane. You know, you got to get your protein when you're traveling, keep your body healthy, and yeah, so a fun fact about me is I'm a bit quirky, and so occasionally it's helpful for me to read books on things like airplane etiquette. So being a little kinder to the people around me.
Yeah, if I mean, just like there's 10 commandments in the Bible, there are also airport commandments as well that uh, I think need a lot more attention. But yeah, Kendall's even at his ordination, I shared that particular story of him coming onto a plane with a hard-boiled egg, and you should have heard the gasp in the room. So, Emily, if you do end up editing this at all, you might want to add some groans and gasping because anybody that travels on here that has any self-awareness, which frankly, sometimes I wonder what percentage really does have awareness in travel because it seems there's not much of that out there.
It
But
sounds like this etiquette book I might need to read to my kids before the next time we travel as a family.
yeah, kids can get away with a little bit more, but adults like Kendall should know better.
That's true.
Learning, I'm learning.
All right, good. Well, let's move into a section we want to try to incorporate each episode that we have together. And this is where we want to speak to what is God saying to you, saying to each one of us personally in this particular season, or just even moment as we're recording these episodes. Again, just to establish some personal connection, and it's not just about God's work around the world; it's also about His work in our own lives, and the two obviously need to go together. They do go together. They're important. What he's doing in us often has application and implication around the world as well. I think you'd be surprised how many people resonate with what God is saying to you. He's often saying to others as well. And so we want to provide some encouragement that way and just be authentic about what he's doing in our lives. We're real human beings too with real emotions. And even though we see all these great things happening and people's lives being changed day in and day out, he's still also at work in our hearts and lives too. And so I'll start with what God has primarily been really speaking to me recently in this particular season of life for me. It comes out of 1 Samuel chapter 16, really just the first verse of that particular passage, where God says to Samuel, the prophet, "How long will you grieve?" Referring to Saul, who was the first king of Israel, had made some really bad decisions and was going down a self-destructive path that was devastating. In fact, in the chapter before, right at the end of 1 Samuel chapter 15, both God and Samuel are grieving this reality about Saul and the choices that he's making, the path that he's chosen. And so God was joining Samuel in that grief. It broke his heart too. But when you turn the page, when you go to the next chapter, we find God challenging now in this season of Samuel's life of asking him this question: how long will you grieve for Saul? And then he tells him to fill his horn with oil and to be on his way because he's going to be sending him to a man named Jesse in Bethlehem, which the rest is history. When Samuel would actually go through with this, that's when he would find that the next king God had chosen would be a young shepherd boy named David. And obviously that's going to be a turning point in Israel's history and in really all of human history for a lot of different reasons. And obviously Jesus himself being identified with David in very significant and prophetic and powerful ways. But there's really three things in this that God has been speaking to me about. Having just gone through a long season of grief and sorrow and loss in different dynamics, there is a season for grief, and grieving is important, and we need to take time to mourn loss in our life. In fact, I think even culturally, we tend to struggle with this and want to move past the grief stage faster in most cases than what is really needed just as a human being and dealing with those kinds of dynamics. So I want to be really, really careful how I'm saying this because there is a season to grieve, there is a season to mourn. Um, but I've been doing that for this past season for a long time. And the other danger on the other side of this is getting stuck in that grief. And I think that's what God is speaking to Samuel here, and also in my own life too. He's saying to him, there's a season to grieve, but there's also a season to move forward. And I'm even careful with that language because I don't think it's ever possible. Those who have gone through any kind of mourning or loss, you don't ever really move on as if that didn't matter or it didn't happen. So that's also not at all what I think God is telling Samuel here, or even speaking to me. We don't ever really move on. We're changed. We're marked by grief and mourning and things that we face, but we can move forward and we can continue to do what God has called us to do in the present, despite what we have suffered in the past. And so he challenges Samuel here. How long will you grieve? But here's the part that this year I'm really pressing into is what he said next to Samuel, which was fill your horn with oil and be on your way. And it's that part about fill your horn with oil that I've been really sitting with and God has been speaking to me about because I've realized grieving is, again, it's necessary. There's a time and a place for that, but it does leave you empty and exhausted.
Mhm.
And grieving is not the same as healing. In fact, grieving is necessary, I believe, for true healing, but it's not the same thing. And so there is that moment, and there are seasons of our lives where we need refilled again, where we need restored, where we need healed. So I'm really pressing in for what that might look like for me in this particular season of life to fill my horn with oil again. And in Samuel's case, this would be a challenge because what God was calling him to do was something that he had just done that looked like it had completely failed and was an utter disaster. He was going to tell him to anoint another king of Israel, and yet the first king of Israel that God called him to anoint and that Samuel invested so much into ended up ending disastrously. And so it'd be hard to do again something that looked like it just completely failed. Uh, and so this would be a challenge for Samuel. But had he not done that, he would have missed out on everything that would come next and a legacy
Mm.
that would last for generations and really for the rest of human history. And so that's where I'm at in this season of life is just really pressing into what does healing really look like and how do I get refilled and restored and healed from, some of the loss and grief that I've experienced over the last couple of years.
So it's interesting that Ben talked about that because I myself have gone through a season the past couple months of grieving, and everyone's journey looks different. But I feel like if it's rooted in Christ, there are common denominators. And so some of the things that you mentioned about Samuel and his grief, in his grief, God was preparing his heart, his mind to move forward and what happens next. And I feel like for me and my heart and my life, God is giving me discernment and helping to prepare me for what comes next because there are a lot of things that could happen out of grief. And so I think that's something too, like God is teaching me how I'm responding to grief. I've gone through many seasons of grief and they don't always look the same. And God has pointed out to me, Emily, every time you grieve is different. You need to seek me and seek that growth because there is growth in grief. You learn more about yourself, you learn more about the Lord, you learn more about how to respond and even help others in grief, even though it may be hard to really face and to seek out that growth and the uncomfortable, vulnerable moments. God always uses every single part of the journey for something greater. And that's something that I'm trying to focus in and lean into to help prepare me for what's next. And so it's very interesting that you chose to talk through that because it's exactly obviously different situations, circumstances, God speaking to us differently. It looks different, but the same topic of grief and
Mm.
healing and trying to find a new normal and going through and experiencing normal life while you're in this grieving and healing journey. It looks different for everyone, but I can really resonate with a lot of what you were speaking to.
Mhm.
Wow. Yeah. Very cool.
So for me, what God is doing in my life is in an area that I've probably struggled with for most of my life, which is struggling with what might be called a scarcity mentality. So, with the work that we do, the needs around the world are so massive. And my role with ServeNow is essentially to be an advocate for people partnering with ServeNow in a financial way and being able to help fund some of the programs and opportunities we have to make an impact on those needs around the world. But sometimes the distance between the needs and the funding is massive when looking at how can we help solve all the problems, and so there's a lot of times where um, I can struggle with sort of the scarcity mentality. Will there be enough? Will God provide? And so one of the books that I read last year, um, and it's related to the spiritual disciplines. So God is really, I would say, last year and even continuing on into this year, God has really been working in me in the area of the spiritual disciplines. Um, and a book that I read last year was the book on prayer by Richard Foster. Really a powerful book about thinking through our prayer life, what it looks like, what kinds of prayers are we praying, considering ways that sometimes our mindset can go wrong in the way we think about prayer. And then this year, I just recently started into a book called Lead with Prayer, which is a really powerful book about the spiritual habits of world-changing leaders and how that for many leaders, especially those of us who are kind of driven, my family will tell you that I stay pretty busy, but to uh, for leaders to take the time to pause and pray um, is recognizing that it's not our work alone that ultimately provides the results that we might want, and recognizing that ultimately we need to put our trust in God to be the provider and to be the one who can fulfill the needs of the world. God knows the needs of the world even more than I do. And so continuing on in that aspect of the spiritual disciplines. And the other thing that's been helpful to me, there's a series called Practicing the Way. I've been listening to a podcast series on that recently and just started with one of the churches that I've been connecting with, starting in a Tuesday night Bible study in this practicing the way disciplines of the Christian walk, and just finding that to be really helpful to keep me focused on making sure I'm not just trusting in the things that I'm doing, kind of the work that I'm doing, but making sure that I'm doing the things that I need to be doing in my spiritual journey, to keep my heart in the right place. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's, that there's such a fine line between we are called to, serve and to do and, be active in our faith. Faith without deeds is dead. I mean, got that whole side of it that God has saved us, not just get us to heaven one day, but He saved us for good works, not by good works, but for good works that He's prepared in advance for us to walk in. So you have that side of it where we are called to be intentional and active, and yet at the same time, we're called to abide in Him, to wait upon Him, to be dependent upon Him, that it's not by power, it's not by might, but by His Spirit. It's His work that He's inviting us into, and ultimately He's got to do it in us and through us. And that kind of fits into even the theme of the year for us at ServeNow. I do a word of the year every year with our team, and maybe we'll do even an episode on this word a little bit more. But the word for this year was the word soar, which kind of carries that same idea. I mean, Jesus said things like, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you not more activity, but I will give you rest."
Yeah.
Right. And for some of us, I'm the same way as Kendall, maybe even 1,000 times more so of a problem for me. But, very active, very type A, very driven. To be honest, the word rest seems rather foreign at times. I don't always identify with what that means. And there, we joke about it at times too. But um, that word soar that we're using as our word of the year this year really comes from Isaiah chapter 40. And I think this might encourage someone, which is why I want to take a moment to read this. But it reminds us, starting at verse 27, why do you complain, Jacob? Why do you say, O Israel? Which, by the way, I love to put my name in there at times too. Why do you complain, Ben? Why do you say, O Benjamin? Uh, that my way is hidden from the Lord and my cause is disregarded by my God. Right? This is somebody, or even the nation itself collectively was feeling forgotten by God.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes we don't like to admit that's the way that we feel too, right? We almost try to be super spiritual about this, but there are times that we wonder where God is, what He's doing, if He cares about us. We feel like He's abandoned or forsaken or forgotten us or doesn't care about us. And if I'm honest, there are many times and seasons and situations where I find myself complaining in that same way of God, don't you care about me? Don't you care about the situation? But we're reminded, do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary, and he increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength, and they will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. And so there is a supernatural strength available to us, even in the midst of our humanity and the reality that we get weak and tired, even in serving Him.
Mhm. Amen.
Okay, so yeah, thank you guys for sharing that. Again, we're going to try to do that and give a little glimpse, a little window into what we're hearing and what's going on in our lives through these podcasts. But I would like to shift now into some things worldwide, right? We also want to provide perhaps a unique global perspective on what's happening in the world because likely whatever news channel you tune into, you're getting a particular bent uh, and worldview that comes through that. You're hearing certain things, but not other things. And usually those agendas in news organizations they just are business, profit minded and have a particular political bent to them. And that's not what we really want to do here. We want to open the door and share with you ways we see God working around the world, because for as much negative news that is out there, and there are really terrible things happening everywhere, at the same time, there's also really beautiful things happening and things that God is doing that we might uniquely, and I think even have a responsibility to try to get out there and share with more people, to let you know that God is very much alive. He is very active and he is at work, and is inviting us into those places and areas in people's lives as well, in a way that will bring encouragement to your heart. So as we think about this, there's so many things we could share. Uh, all of our staff every single week gets a report that we send out on Wednesdays that is just filled with stories and testimonies of people's lives being transformed, and their stories of how God met them right where they were, and in very meaningful and life transforming ways. So, in this section, what I'd like to do is just ask each of us for what caught your eye this week as you looked at that report that we are privileged to be able to see every week. Was there a particular story that stood out to you? And again, I'll start with the one that struck me. Uh, and this has to do with our work in Ukraine. Obviously, Ukraine has been in the news for quite a while, and all the terrible dynamics of war there. Ukraine was one of the original countries actually that ServeNow started in, well before even this current war has been going on. So we've been active there for a long time, and through all of this, have day in, day out, week in, week out, we have a very committed team there. At some point, we'll bring in our national leader from Ukraine so you can hear more directly from her. But the story from Ukraine that stood out to me, particularly here during winter when it's freezing over there, uh, and Russia continually attacks their power grid purposely and psychologically to demoralize as many people as possible. And these are civilians, right, that are suffering the dynamics of being without heat and being without power. So there was an elderly woman named Tamara, and she told us at the very beginning of the war, which again has been, what, 3 years ago now, actually, almost exactly. Um, she said at the beginning of the war, a mortar shell hit her home and the house burned down completely. And they still haven't, they can't restore it. Although later she'll note that they're trying to rebuild another home. But with nowhere else to go, her family, and that includes her husband who has a disability, an elderly mother, and a son, they moved into an old garage. That's where they've been living for these past several years. That was meant to be temporary, but now it's been, and I had this actually, now that I'm saying this too, I had this number wrong. It's not been 3 years of this war, it's been 4 years. So for the last 4 years, they've been living out of a garage, an old garage. And obviously that can't be heated with gas. But what we were able to do is have volunteers help install a small wood stove. So she said this: in winter, it's our only source of warmth, and we also cook our food on it. During the winter season, firewood is our most urgent need. And that's actually one of our primary focuses right now during the winter months, is providing firewood, generators, power banks, heavy blankets, and other items to survive the winter. But firewood is primary to a lot of the families that we're helping. And she said it's the only affordable way for us to heat the space. Electric heating is simply impossible for our family financially, and moreover, due to power outages. But thanks to the firewood support we received, we are able to survive the cold season in warmth. And this year, with temperatures reaching 1.4 degrees Fahrenheit, that this helps again give us the chance to live in a heated space. It's extremely difficult for us to purchase enough firewood on our own, especially while we're still trying to rebuild our destroyed home. And then this line: we are deeply grateful not only to ServeNow for its faithful yearly support, but your contribution helps our family survive this winter with dignity and warmth.
Mhm.
And I just love that last part. It's not just even about people surviving, but it's giving them dignity and letting them know that they matter and that God loves them and cares about them. So that's the story that stood out to me, particularly this week.
Hmm.
That's powerful because so many people don't realize it's not just the tangible things, it's the feelings too. So I think that's huge.
Definitely.
Emily, did you have a particular story that stood out to you this week?
Yeah, I do. So as a marketer, I always look at connecting points, especially when there are areas in the world that are so different. So, how can we in the United States and even over here relate to people in other countries where some of the things that happen seem so unimaginable to us? I know for me, at least, before I got involved in missions and things happening globally, some of the stories I would hear, it would be so hard to relate and even understand because we couldn't even imagine some of the things happening in our own neighborhoods and communities that happen in other places. And so the story that I kind of really spoke to me with that connector piece that helps put together, like they're real people just like us here. There was a seminary graduation in a very persecuted nation in Asia, and at the graduation ceremony, they were given a series, the basic series books, which we'll probably get into in another episode. But basically, um, it's a vehicle for people to understand and apply the Bible and the concepts in the Bible to their everyday life. So it helps um, new believers a lot of times, and even very well seasoned believers and pastors really kind of relate more and apply um, biblical principles to their own lives. And so these pastors at this graduation ceremony were given this series of books. I think it was the basic things you have to know about Jesus
Yeah.
from
Yep.
my memory. And they were given these to go out into their communities to share. And so I'm going to share one quote from one of the pastors there. So he says, "When I held this book in my hands, I wept. For years, I've struggled to find materials that explain the gospel clearly in our language without complicated theology. This is exactly what our people need, a simple truth they can understand and share. I've already given copies to 3 families in my village who are seeking Christ, and they're reading it together every evening." And I think from even a Western perspective, so many of us here get intimidated because of the complicated theology. You think, I didn't go to seminary school. I don't have training on this. How am I supposed to fully understand what this means and how it impacts my life today, even though it happened thousands of years ago? And I think that's something that's always going to be true. We all want to fully comprehend as believers the Bible, to live like Jesus, to serve like Jesus, to understand God, to be more like Him. And so, how do we do that without comprehending the Bible? So, these issues that are happening here with me, with us on this call, with other people in the American church and in the West are also happening in other cultures. And so, it's really powerful that God is equipping people to help bring more basic knowledge to people to be able to do that. And so I think that's one of the things that just spoke out to me. Because again, as a marketer, part of my job is to make sure that people understand what's happening around the world and how can they do that if they can't relate to them. And so that's really kind of why that story stuck out to me.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a good one. For me, as I was reading through our report, I was really struck by one of the newer countries that we're beginning to do some work in. Last year, when Ben and I traveled to the Middle East, we were able to meet some Syrian refugees. But this testimony was from our Middle East director, who is actually beginning to do some launching of that basic series into Syria via Zoom. And so I'm just going to read his brief report here because I think it's so powerful to just realize that God is working behind the scenes in
Mhm.
ways that you're not going to typically hear on your modern newscasts here in the West. So this is what he says. He says, I'm writing to share some good news from Syria. Yesterday, I had a Zoom call with church leaders and pastors in a new city in Syria. They joined us in the TBT, that's the basic things discipleship. Around 30 people attended, and the meeting lasted half a day. I was with them throughout the session via Zoom. I presented everything related to the basic series ministry, group discipleship, and disciple making for multiplication. After the meeting ended, they received the books to begin working in their groups. The meeting was excellent and filled with great joy. We are planning, God willing, to implement this initiative in several locations in Syria using Zoom until the Lord opens the way for travel. Please pray for the situation in Syria as it has become very difficult. Hundreds of thousands are now fleeing, living in the streets and along the borders with Iraq and Turkey. The Syrian regime has begun attacks and has driven the Kurds out of their regions. Today, I also received several calls from pastors and leaders in the Kurdish areas describing the severe living conditions and hardships they are facing. So I'm just so grateful to know that there's an opportunity for these pastors and Christians living in these communities to feel a sense of encouragement and joy through those who are able to speak their language, be able to connect to them culturally. And this series, the basic series, is translated into their mother tongue, so it helps them really be able to be encouraged through these scripture resources. And so that was really special to me to read that.
So I'm actually going to pivot a little bit. Kendall, I, Emily, I mean, we did spend a little time and we have, a bit of a agenda that we tried to set in place as we were beginning this to not just go into it, completely cold, but at the same time, I want us to be able to be flexible and just see where the conversation might take us. So I was thinking as we were each sharing a story that stood out to us, is we went from firewood to discipleship resources. And I think, that's a good picture, actually, really, of what we feel called to and what probably many of you that are going to be listening or watching this are aware of or already partnering with us in is that ServeNow is a very holistic type of ministry. That's our approach. And part of that is because one way to say this, the way that I like to put it, is that Jesus himself did not just have a preaching ministry or a teaching or a discipleship ministry. He didn't just have a healing or miracle or demon possession ministry. He didn't just have a feeding, ministry or any other number of things. He did a lot of different things, not just one thing. He came for one main purpose, but he didn't do just one thing. In fact, the book of Acts, chapter 10, there's a verse as Peter's sharing the gospel with Gentiles who are going to become believers. He explains to them they had already heard about Jesus, and the way that he kind of summarized a part of that was you heard how he went around doing good. And I think sometimes we forget about that. I mean, he didn't just, he didn't just talk. He didn't just give sermons or lectures or teaching. He was actively serving people according to their need, and where God was at work in a very holistic way. In fact, one of my pet peeves is when we talk about winning souls to Jesus, and the reason I don't like that is not because I'm against evangelism. We do a lot of that, of course, too. And certainly we want to win people to Jesus. But I don't like the language of winning souls to Jesus because as human beings, we're more than souls, right? We're people. And God doesn't just care about our soul, he cares about the whole person. And we could probably have a whole other episode on this very point itself. But that is an approach that we believe as we talk about serving like Jesus and what we believe he's called us to at ServeNow, is that we want to serve people in a holistic way. In fact, speaking to that very point, Kendall or Emily, doesn't matter which of you goes first, but do either of you want to chime in on that part, in terms of how you look at that, or a story that captures that? Um, what comes to mind when you think of, because a lot of people do say, it's hard. What does ServeNow do? And sometimes it can be hard to explain it. Um, but what would you guys say as you're
Yeah.
thinking about that?
I think when I was coming on board, I obviously knew about ServeNow and some of the things that we were involved in, but I think to fully understand when I was having conversations with you, Ben, one of the best phrases that I remember you saying was meeting people where they're at. So whatever their need is, we come in and help, whether that is firewood, totes, resources, vegetable plants, you name it. And I think that's something that really sets us apart from other missions organizations. I've been involved in other missions organizations, and of course, being in this space, you kind of learn about all the different organizations and what they do. And I feel like a lot of them narrow in so specifically on a few programs or only helping people that fit in a certain box. And I feel like that's something that we do really well. Um, I feel like we never want to turn people away. We use a lot of these programs as a door to open up conversations about the gospel and Jesus. And so, I feel like it's a more natural approach to advancing the gospel, because it's treating people not just like a soul that, I don't know, you're determining what happens to your soul when you die, and that plays into the religion part, but in order to get there and to even have those foundational beliefs, there's a whole journey of being a person, providing for yourself and your family, and making ends meet and being in community with one another. And so I think Serve Now is, again, like you said, a really holistic image of all of that.
Yeah. Well, and as you guys were talking, and Ben, even as you had sent us a little bit about what we were going to talk about today, I just, as I was reading through this past week's report, I was reading about the outreach that happened in Benin with the disabled um, folks that had gathered there, and it started with just handing them some food, but they also shared the gospel with them, and folks came to Christ. They made commitments to Christ, but it wasn't just making commitments to Christ. They now want to do participate with the basic series and be able to go through this discipleship series. And I know from having traveled to Benin last year that we see so many times where there's such holistic um, approach. And one of the things that I just thought was awesome, we were sitting around a table there in Benin with several African leaders from Western Africa talking about what has made an impact. And one of the things they talked about is a program that I get really excited about, which is micro enterprise, where we're able to help folks be able to start a business that then not only provides for their own needs, but then they can ultimately be able to be a blessing to their own community. So it's not just physically providing for their needs, but giving them a sense of
Mhm.
purpose, of being able to be a blessing and multiply that kindness around their community. And all of that with the gospel clearly being communicated in those contexts as well. So I just I get excited about all the different ways that we try to minister to the whole person, and the way that that is happening in unique ways in each of the unique countries that we work in.
And from a biblical perspective too, I'll just challenge maybe those that are listening. we all have grown up in, we live in a particular cultural reality, but cultures are very different, worldwide, and that includes the way that we think, and not just culturally here and now, but even, cultures from past times. There are different, views on different things, and this would be one of those areas where Western those of us in the Western part of the world tend to think more in turn. We have more of a either or mindset, that either you do this or you do that, but you can't do both. But many parts of the world where we work, they don't have so much an either or mindset. They have more of a both and perspective, that it's not always a simple choice between this or that, but it's, well, we can do this and we can do that. And what's
Mhm.
interesting to me, I mean, if you look at this uh, in scripture, you'll find there is often more of a both and mindset that's at work there. And that was true for the Hebrew culture and mindset at that time as well. Um, so I'll give you some practical examples. When you read stories in the gospel accounts of Jesus healing people, even for example, or anything that he does, you will find he actually deals with people on multiple levels, even at the same time, that he doesn't always just physically heal someone, but he also addresses their spiritual need, or it might be a spiritual need and a physical need and a relational need. So a good example of that is one of the man who was there was a man who was paralyzed. His friends came. They tore a hole through the roof. They lowered it. It's a pretty well-known story. And Jesus looked at him and obviously knew what he needed. The obvious need would have been physical, right? That's why his friends brought him there, and Jesus is commending their faith and the actions that they took and all of that. But he doesn't just heal the man physically. He actually uses that as an opportunity to challenge some in the audience that were there about what's easier to do, to say to this man, pick, to get up and walk, or for his sins to be forgiven. And Jesus recognizes that there's a spiritual need there, not just a physical need. And you'll see this in many examples, many cases where Jesus is operating on multiple levels, spiritually, emotionally, relationally. The woman with the issue of blood, she didn't just need a physical healing. She needed to, Jesus, would later hold her up as an example of faith, but tell her to go in peace. There was an emotional dynamic to that. There was a relational dynamic to that, because she was ostracized from the community because of the issue that she had. So Jesus was reintegrating her back into the community. So you'll see that Jesus actually had a very holistic approach in the way that he served people, starting with meeting them where they were, but he was also able to identify other needs within that context as well. But even the Great Commission, this is one I think we see and we read into it a either or mentality, but really it's a both and, because Jesus said you would be my witnesses in Jerusalem and Samaria and Judea and the ends of the earth. But sometimes we read that as you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem or Samaria, right? A culture a little bit different than yours, but close by, or Judea, right? Maybe I'll call you to a different state, but still within the same country or general region, or you'll be a missionary somewhere, in some other country, right? So we hear either or, we hear multiple choice, and we even say things like, God has called me locally and not internationally, or internationally but not locally. And I sometimes wonder, where do we get that from? Because the Great Commission is not an either or multiple choice. It's a all of the above. It's a both and. We're called locally and globally. Or there's actually a book called Glocal. I forget the whole title of it, but it combines the two to say we need to be present where we are and
Mhm.
engage there, but we are also called worldwide. And as we go worldwide, don't also forget about those closest. Um,
Yeah, that's really good. And I think that, one of the things I often share with people when I'm interacting with them is that there are things we can do locally that we can't do internationally, and there's things we can do internationally that we can't do locally. Like I can go out to coffee with somebody just down the street and I can disciple them personally.
Yeah.
But if I wanted to buy a pastor a car in my neighborhood, or, somebody that is trying to serve people in my community, if I wanted to buy them a van, your average person doesn't have the finances to do that. But internationally, I can buy a pastor a bicycle and
Mm.
he's going to go, multiply God's message around his community in such a faster way. So there's things we can do internationally that we can't do locally, and there's things we can do locally that we can't as easily do internationally. So I agree 100%. I think it's very much a both and. We should be involved in all of them. Because internationally, it gives us a perspective too, sometimes that we miss locally. Um, and locally, it really refines us in some ways that international relationships don't refine us in the same way. So, yeah, I think it's beautiful to be able to be involved in God's kingdom in a holistic and to every nation way.
That's a really good way to put it. Yeah, and I remember too when I was pastoring. Again, the focus obviously in that context was more local, but we were still very intentional missionally and globally. And I even felt a conviction. I worked with another organization during that time as a volunteer. They were an online ministry, but you could disciple and interact with people online from literally all over the world, people from all over the world. And I had some of the most engaged conversations, the most thoughtful uh,
Wow.
interactions in that context, even though, my primary focus at that time in that season was more locally. But it didn't have to be this either or dichotomy. It can be both and, even if there might be a primary emphasis, right? Even for us at ServeNow, we are more global than we are local, and yet that doesn't mean we don't do things locally. We do have
Mhm.
some activity even here in the U.S., and there's an impact in people's lives and churches in a different way because of our international work, kind of like global or like Kendall's saying, um, at a very local level. So yeah, just a challenging thought. Even the parable of the Good Samaritan, when Jesus, was using that to answer the question, who is my neighbor? When that person was trying to justify his neighbor being someone just like him.
Mhm.
And Jesus essentially, if you look at that parable of a Samaritan helping a Jew, and there's so many things Jesus was doing there in that parable, but part of it was he's essentially saying our neighbor is anyone, anywhere, no matter how similar or different to us, that we see in need, that we come across that's in need.
Mhm.
And today, with the global technology and the ability to uh, see what's happening around the world and to be connected to that in ways that perhaps in the past weren't the same. I think we need to keep that in mind, that our neighbor, it can literally be somebody on the other side of the world. And
Mhm.
there is a responsibility to that, even as we're going on our way and living our lives in a very, local context.
Yeah, good.
All right. Well, we are coming up, I think, on an hour. I think we're pretty close to that. So we're probably going to stop there. There was certainly more that we had that we were going to try to get to, but I will just give a plug for this. This will make Emily happy as a marketer, which I love how you're not ashamed of that at all, because really you shouldn't be. Same with fundraisers, should not have any shame in that. I mean, it's a we want to get word out about what God is doing and opportunities that people have to be a significant part of that. And we do feel like that's part of our job, is to help people see their part in the story. In fact, when I think about Serve Now, literally the Kendall and I were together last night at about this time that we're recording this. So barely over 24 hours ago, and we were meeting with a church, and it was kind of an introduction to Serve Now and some things that they might want to get involved in. And one of the ways I explained Serve Now at the very beginning was all we are is a jawbone of a donkey, which is a reference to Samson when he took up a jawbone of a donkey and killed 1,000 Philistines with that jawbone. I said, that's really all ServeNow is. We are a jawbone in the hands of men and women of faith who want to pick that up. We're just a tool, an instrument that people of faith can pick up, and they can see exponential, multiplying, long lasting results and impact
Mhm.
in the things that they're able to do. That, again, back to Kendall's point, um, you know, amounts and even very specific things that we can do internationally, you could never do at that scale here. And yet they go 100, 1,000 times farther in other parts of the world. And
Mhm.
so that's one way of describing ServeNow. But if you'd like to hear more about some of those principles, I did write a book called Serve Like Jesus, and that's a bit where the name even of this podcast comes from. But this has 12 key principles that we see in the life of Jesus in scripture, of the way that he served, and really gets at the core and the DNA of the way ServeNow operates as well, and that we approach the world hopefully in that same spirit that Jesus approached during his 3.5 years on earth. But as we bring this to a close, Kendall or Emily, is there any closing comment you want to share, or anything more you want to say just for this first episode, which again I know is
Before we
very.
close and get off of that topic, you should tell listeners where they can buy your book.
This is why we have Emily, so she can keep us on track. Yeah, so Serve Like Jesus. You can find it on Amazon. So you can either type in that title, Serve Like Jesus, or my name, Ben Foley. You can also find it on our website, weservenow.org. That book, along with other um, books and resources, even our basic series books that we talked about, Kendall and Emily talked about earlier, are available there. Books, that page on our website will direct you to Amazon for for any of these full books, but we do have the basic series books available as well that can be purchased for those here in the US.
Yeah. Well,
Awesome.
my closing thought is just we didn't mention it on here, but the tagline of Serve Now is Serve Now, procrastinate later. And so I would say that if there's anything you heard in today's episode that you feel like God's tugging at your heart,
Mm,
just do whatever God's telling you to do because you can trust him. He's a good father. He wants to give good gifts to his children. So even if it's stretching, even if it's challenging, even if you're not sure
mhm.
exactly what's going to happen down the road, if you do this thing that you feel like God's calling you to do, just step out in faith, serve now, and procrastinate later. That's my final thought.
Piggybacking off of Kendall, I think one final thought, maybe encouragement for those listening would be if you're finding yourself in that space of either or, pray for discernment, how you can step out and change from that either or mentality to a both and what that looks like. It may look like getting involved with an organization like ServeNow or figuring out with your local church how you can serve and what they're doing locally and globally. So just pray for that discernment and what that looks like. And um, I promise you, I think God has greater things in store if you listen and pray for that discernment.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, one of the things we didn't get to, I was in this episode, we were going to do a little bit on the origin story of ServeNow, but I think what will actually be better is if we save that for a future episode when we have our founder on, which is
Mhm.
one of the plans we had coming up was to have him as a special guest to share more of the origin story of ServeNow. So we'll save that for that time. But yeah, I agree with Kendall and Emily that probably, the biggest thing coming through this and message that we have is that idea of we are called to service. We are called to engage. We are called to be intentional. We are called to not procrastinate, but to serve now. And I know we love sharing that because there is a message in that to begin with. In fact, you want to do an interesting study, if everybody likes to get caught up in trying to figure out the future and timelines and how our end time, events going to play out. But we often miss the main point in all of those. You look at any end time related teaching that Jesus gave, or wherever it's talked about him coming back, almost every single time the call or the reminder
Mhm.
in living in light of his return is to remain faithful in serving him, to be active in
Mhm.
serving him. And yeah, I know, Martha gets a bad rap with being anxious and worried about many things. But the point that Jesus was making about Martha was not that she was never to do anything. It was that there finding that place where we, like Kendall talked about earlier, we engaged a little bit even with Isaiah 40, of being in a place of being still and knowing that he's God, waiting upon him, being dependent on him. But that doesn't mean that we are passive.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean that we're disengaged. That
Mhm.
doesn't mean
Mhm.
that we're not active in serving him. We can actually wait upon him as we're serving, and just knowing seasons. There's times that he does call us to, hey, chill out, be still. I
Mhm.
had, I'll just give a personal example. I had a red eye flight. I mentioned about Kendall and I meeting with a church about this time yesterday. But when I came back from that meeting, Kendall and I had dinner together. Came back, I am just slammed with work, and I was hoping to get around to, checking some boxes off with that. But I was exhausted. I could barely keep my eyes open. So I went to bed earlier than I think I've ever went to bed in a long time. And I got some rest and woke up today and got, fairly far in the things that I had hoped to get done, some of those being yesterday. So, when I think about the fact I, didn't do last night, some of the things that I ended up doing today, but I got done a lot of things that I needed to get done anyway. So there are those times we need to just, rest and cease from our activity and trust God in that, while at the same time staying engaged with his heart and serving. That's how
Mhm.
Jesus lived his life. Times that he would go away and pray on the mountain, and then other times he would continue on that journey of just going around doing good. And he was
Mhm.
very active in the 3.5 years that we have of his ministry in the gospel accounts. A lot of things that he did, and a lot more that John even notes in his gospel that aren't even recorded, but just a small taste of some of the things that he did. So Jesus was very active, while at the same time living in that place of dependency on his Father and being led by the Spirit.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's good.
All right. Well, we will end this episode with that. But if you'd like to find out more about ServeNow, again, just feel free to visit our website, weservenow.org. Reach out to us. We are very attempt to be very relational and personal, and would love to talk with you more. Um, but yeah, thank you, Emily. Thank you, Kendall, for
Mhm.
this first one, and we'll see where we go from here. But we certainly have a lot of ideas and items that we would love to share, in this particular platform and context with you as we go from here. So God bless you, and thanks for tuning into this very first episode of Serve Like Jesus podcast.